Summer is upon us. Our summertime, you know how we get in the summer, we kind of just slow down a little bit and we kind of just move into a different mode, and how our lives just start to tend towards thinking of recreation and rest. And it's interesting because a lot of the books that I have read have always said that the summertime isn't a good time to preach heavy topics. And then they give us the Bread of Life discourse. For the next 5 weeks, we're going to be hearing the whole Bread of Life discourse, chapter 6 from John's Gospel. And it starts today, of course, with the feeding of the 5,000. We're going to be covering, if you will, a particular topic. Jesus desires to feed us. Jesus has this desire to feed us in so many different ways. You know, isn't it interesting when you look around you every day, just about everything involves food? I mean, food is an essential part of our existence, so we do at least a couple of times a day have to sit down and enjoy a meal. And when you look at it, food is always a centerpiece, even when we have gatherings and when we get together. This time of year, as I said earlier, to the children, there are barbecues going, and we have all of these special events that are primarily built around delicious food, of getting together and relaxing and enjoying a good meal. You ever notice too, maybe you're watching a ball game or you're watching a TV show, and it's about that time of day, maybe it's about dinner time, it's in the evening, and the first commercial that pops up is for some fast food restaurant, and they're showing you this delicious looking hamburger, and then they have this chicken sandwich, and you're just looking at it and you're like, maybe I should get in my car and go get that, huh? And they know in advertising that they can get you. They know how to get you. And let's face it, a lot of times with their advertising, it looks so delicious. And we start getting really hungry for it and we kind of pine for it. But we also kind of know implicitly too that that's really not good food. It looks delicious and it'll go down nice, but a lot of that fast food is just not all that healthy. Or if you remember that guy, that reporter that went and did that thing where he ate McDonald's every day for every meal for 30 days straight. They called it Supersize Me, and it supersized him. I mean, it's amazing how we can be pulled in and fed something that really isn't good for us. And we'll go and eat food that really isn't the best for us. I remember in my previous assignment one day, I was making a couple of hot dogs, and the pastor came in, he was in his 70s, and he goes, I used to love to have hot dogs. I said, I'll make you some if you want. He goes, I can't. My doctor told me I can't do that, too much sodium. And then he smiled and he goes, and your doctor will be saying it to you soon, too. We know these things, and we have to, but yet we still can be tempted by them, and we can be pulled into these things. Jesus desires to feed us. And he just fed 5,000 without any effort whatsoever. We heard a similar thing in the first reading where the prophet was able to feed a multitude with next to nothing. You know, it's interesting how that happens, and it's interesting how we see these things. And let's face it, it's John's gospel, so there's a much deeper meaning, because John isn't just going to give us something that's superficial. He's going to have a much deeper point that he's making. And we're going to hear it very clearly in the coming weeks as we unfold the Bread of Life discourse. And as Jesus will even say, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink of his blood, you will have no life within you. Unless you eat healthy spiritual food, you will have no life within you. Jesus does desire to feed us. But we have to be very careful, because just like with regular food, we can sometimes be attracted to things that are not the best for our soul. We can be attracted to things that aren't necessarily going to be feeding us spiritually the way Jesus desires to feed us. Look around our culture today. Look at some of the things that are valued in our culture today, and it's everywhere. I mean, not just advertising to get us to eat junk food. That's one thing. They know how to do that. But all of the other messages that are out there, we're surrounded in TV shows and in movies, and we're surrounded through our education systems and in other ways with a lot of these things that sound good and might be enticing, but aren't very healthy for our spiritual soul. And we need to be fed on truth and goodness. We need to be encouraged to be men and women of God, to be children of God, and to live a life worthy, as St. Paul told us in the second reading. We're going to be also paralleling the readings from Ephesians. So please make sure you do read the letter to the Ephesians. We picked up at chapter 4 today. But that letter that he's writing to the Ephesians, he's trying to encourage them, and he's trying to say to them, there's a better way, and you know what it is. Live that truth, embrace that truth, accept the truth of Jesus Christ. You know, my dear brothers and sisters, so often it's easy to get caught up in what's around us. We can become somewhat of a function of the world around us, and sometimes we're just getting that negative food, that bad food for our souls, and we don't even notice how it's taking its effect upon us. I don't know how many times I've had someone come in, and I can see right away that they're spiritually starved. I mean, so many people, they're spiritually starved. They're hungering for good spiritual food and finding none. And they're being caught up in a world that's sending them down a path that isn't always healthy for them. I mean, look at things like the teaching that the church has on human sexuality, the beautiful gift that God has given us, beautiful gift that Blessed Paul VI expressed so wonderfully in the document Humani Vitae 50 years ago this week. Bishop Barris has written a wonderful letter, and it's available in the lobbies for everybody to read. A way of being fed the truth so that we can live as authentic human beings, caring and loving one another the way it was intended by God. And yet so many messages we receive in society, so many things tell us, no, don't worry about it. It's all about you. It's all about you getting what you want, eating what you want to eat, and treating people the way you want to treat them, and using them for your pleasure. I mean, when you look at it, most people today are not learning about human sexuality, certainly from the Gospels or certainly from the church. They're telling us that internet pornography has basically taken over. How many young people now are addicted to it and watch it on a regular basis, and it's not even close to what's accurate. And yet that's what they begin to believe to be good. And yet we know better. You've been fed with the food of Christ. He desires to feed you that goodness. And I don't know any parent in the world that would feed their child junk, at least not on purpose. And yet we need to be fed. And that means that certain things have to kind of fall in place for us. We have to start to recognize what's around us, what we're actually being fed, and recognize, like when we're eating the junk food, you know how like when people eat junk food for a while, this guy in Super Size Me, he noticed he lost energy, even though he was getting a lot of calories. He lost certain desires. He started to put on some weight. He wasn't feeling so good. He knew there was something wrong in his body. And a lot of us know there's something wrong in our souls. We're depressed. We're anxious. We don't get it. We're overwhelmed. And then someone says, oh, maybe you should say a prayer. I do pray. Okay. But that depth of being fed by Christ, of coming before Him and letting Him feed us, that requires a lot of trust, and that requires a lot of, if you will, abandonment of self. You know, my dear brothers and sisters, Jesus desires your good. He desires to give you healthy spiritual food. And He's doing it all the time. He's there and doing it. But we have to be the ones receptive. We're the ones that have to say, when we see that other food, no, that's garbage. I can't consume that. I have to consume the food of Christ. Which means having a very strong prayer life, which means having our lives based in the Scriptures and reading the Scriptures all the time, which means turning off the world, if you will. The worldly enticements, St. Paul is going to tell us, don't help. They mislead and they misguide, and not necessarily with intent, but they just do. God has given us certain passions, certain desires, so that we do good and healthy things. I mean, He put this thing called hunger in us, and He gave us food to eat, but He also said, eat healthy and eat well. And so we have to feed ourselves with good and healthy food, both physically and spiritually. So in the coming weeks, I'm going to ask you to start to focus a little bit more on what we're hearing from Jesus. To listen to these words and be prepared when you arrive. In the 5th week of this series, we're going to hear from Ephesians that great image of Jesus marrying us, of Jesus, the great image of Christ in the church, in a union so intimate like husband and wife. He desires to give himself to us fully and totally, most especially in the Eucharist and in the sacraments, totally feeding us and totally caring for us as a spouse would for his wife. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, start to hear Jesus saying, I want you to be alive. I want you to be vibrant. I want you to have good and healthy food. I don't want all of the pain and the anguish. I don't want all of the suffering to overwhelm you and to pull you down. I want to be the one to lift you up. And today, my dear brothers and sisters, Jesus desires to feed you with that vibrant food, that healthy food, that wonderful food. And so we're going to hear how we need to be more receptive to the good and the true. How we have to recognize that as a people on a journey, we need to be fed constantly so that we're strong for the journey. We're going to hear all of these different stories and different passages that are going to remind us we were built for something greater. We were created for God and God alone. And it is the hand of the Lord that feeds us. He's the one that answers all of your needs. So together as brothers and sisters, we build one another up and accept the food of Christ and share that food with others. God loves you tremendously and he wants the best for you. Open your hearts to him and I guarantee he will feed you with the best and greatest food. And you will start to recognize how wonderful it is when you live in the freedom of the child, as being a child of God. May God bless you and give you his peace. Amen.